Welcome to Between Two Chairs, Demystifying Commercial Real Estate, the podcast that brings you the latest insights and trends on the South Florida commercial real estate market, with your hosts, Fernando Arencibia Jr. and Jennifer Woolman. In each episode, we dive into the world of commercial real estate and break down complex concepts to make them accessible for everyone. Whether you're a real estate professional, a curious investor, or just interested in the South Florida market in general, Between Two Chairs is the podcast for you. So pull up a chair and join us.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Between Two Chairs. My name is Fernando Arencibia, and with me, as always, is the book fairy, that is Jennifer Woolman. Jennifer, say hi.
Hi, everybody. Well, you know, I would consider little libraries to be real estate.
I like it. I like it. I love it. Actually, it kind of coincides because we're heading into, we're at the start of Art Basel, and I don't know if you saw Faena did this art installation of a floating library, and it's beautiful. It's basically like a library of books in the middle of a small pool, and you actually get to take off your shoes and walk in the water and grab any book that you want.
Oh, so
and they
cool.
have these little lights. It's really super awesome. We'll put a link in the show notes, but I think you will love it. But anyway, we are not talking about books today. We are talking about what, Jennifer?
This was your topic idea months and months ago, and I just wrote it down. It's called Broker of the Future.
Okay, so
you can't talk around me because you say, I have an idea, and I write it down, and then it goes on the calendar, and now here we are.
Here's where though the really the fault lies within the fact that the person who came up with the idea didn't write it down themselves. So now I've had to scramble to look for ideas. But I think one of the things that we were discussing was the importance of always looking into the future to kind of see what are going to be the expectations of the consumer and the expectation of people who are also our consumers, as people who run brokerages are the expectations of our agents and how those things are going to change. And I went down this rabbit hole to kind of break down what a brokerage would look like in 5 years and 10 years, and kind of where things are headed. One of the things that has really shifted is that there was a time in which you would go into a brokerage, you were very tied to that brand. You would do desk hours, you would answer phone calls. People would walk into the office. The world of the internet has shifted all that dramatically. Real estate offices needed to grow as they were growing in agent count because people would come into the office. That has shifted, tremendously. And the idea is that the broker of the future is not a desk, it's not a logo, it's not a commission split manager. They are going to be, and they're going to, the consumer is going to demand that they are more of strategist, capital allocator, and an ecosystem builder. And it's this idea that the most important value that you can add to an agent, and therefore to the consumers that they serve, is to be a strategist to them, to help them grow their business. Sort of like the idea of the broker as a mentor and as a person that helps you build the small businesses that are within the ecosystem of a brokerage.
I agree, and I think, we had a lot of changes this year, which is why I think whatever we were talking the day that we were talking, when you came up with it, yeah. So, between changes from the National Association of Realtors to changes in how people are searching online to, the huge and rapid evolution of AI and the availability of data, et cetera, and even how we market, with social media and everything online. Yeah. I think that it definitely does change how the broker is viewed. Before, we were the keepers of the information and data, right? We had all the information and all the data. Now there is more information and data out there to the point where I think it's overwhelming to both the agents and the clients. So our job becomes more bringing in the human element to all of that data. What does all of that data mean? What is the intuition? Yeah. What kind of advice can we give based on other stuff that we know that might be affecting the specific data that they're looking at, right? They might be looking, depending on what kind of data they're getting and what information overall, maybe not just data, but overall information they're getting. Is it macroeconomic, like you discussed when you were talking about, Lawrence Yune's NAR overview, economic overview, or is it hyper-specific data, not taking into account some of the bigger events that might be happening, maybe not on a national scale, but on a county scale that might affect something in the neighborhood, right?
Absolutely.
So I think you're right. I think, a lot of the human side is going to become much more important. And I was talking to somebody the other day because with all of this stuff going on with AI and how reliant we've become on tech for everything, right? I mean, when was the last time you went into a bank? When was the last time you wrote a paper check, right? We haven't done that. And I ran into an issue where a huge mistake was made. Thank God it went to my daughter, and it was supposed to be for property taxes. I did everything right. I read everything. I double checked. I triple checked. And the check went to the wrong person. It wasn't a paper check. It was all done online. Right. And so I'm like, so we were talking about that. Yeah. And it was like, well, if I had written a paper check, there wouldn't have been that mistake, right? So a lot of the tech also lends itself, we just had a conversation with our agents, right? A lot of the tech lends itself to nefarious, hacking and taking of personal data and taking of stuff. So I think the broker of the future is also going to have to be a guardian of that. Like, how do we protect our agents and our clients' information? How do we protect them from when they post a listing, it not getting hacked somehow, right? How does the broker ensure that the funds are going where they need to go with all of the deep fakes and everything that's out there? And I know it sounds, George Guerra always makes fun of me. He's like, you're so paranoid, you're so this. And I'm like, but it's happening. We know it's happening. We see it's happening. We all know people who have lost deposits or escrows because they've gone to the wrong place. And, as a broker, and to your point on the infrastructure that's being created that we have within our company, I was talking to Ricardo with Folio Title, and some of the stuff that they're doing because of things that they've seen. They saw somebody presented a fake driver's license, and somebody caught it, but it was such a good fake, but it was at a closing. Right. So now there's all this re-authentication software. We're seeing it with the Miami Association of Realtors, right? Just to log into the MLS, you already need your email, you need your password, and now they're sending you an authentication code. How do we authenticate? How do we make sure that the data that we're putting out there stays true? Yeah. To what we're putting out there versus getting used for something else?
Well, I mean, definitely, what you're talking about is that in every innovation comes with pitfalls. It's not only the good players that are innovating, the bad players are also innovating. And so that we always have to take a look at that. But going back to your point about the enormous amounts of data that is at the behest of the consumer and the agent, and there is a scene in Ratatouille, the movie Ratatouille, in which the critic, aptly named Ego, is about to order, and he basically says, "I would like perspective." And then he goes, seeing that there's none in the menu, serve me whatever you want, and I will provide the perspective. And I think that we, our power, our strength, our ability to add the most value to our consumer as brokers, as agents, is to provide that perspective for the data. What is the data really saying? Because, when you take statistics in college, any great statistics professor will tell you that statistics can be used can be utilized to tell any story. And so it's important to provide context. And some of that context is also provided by you understanding what it is that your client ultimately wants to achieve, because that becomes a component of providing the perspective from the data. The other thing that is increasingly important is to understand that agents don't join brokerages; they join outcomes, right? And so I think that the brokerage of the future is going to be continually focused on where the agent wins and providing those wins in the agents. In other words, to build a machine, a structure, an infrastructure where others rise with you, right? And I think that is where you become almost like and I think there's a beautiful word to say it, but I don't want to butcher it, but it is somebody who diagnoses problems, right? Like understanding that 85% of agents never scale, right? That they don't understand the difference between a tool and a system. And so understanding and diagnosing those bottlenecks, and then you really become, more than anything, a productivity manager, right? And how important that coaching is to the success of that agent, and therefore the quality of the services that they provide to the consumer. One of the things that you also mentioned had to do with AI. And I think that we've heard people say that, AI that's not going to replace an agent, but an agent that uses AI will replace an agent who doesn't. And I think that that's kind of the same thing for the brokerage. Morgan Stanley came out with a report that says that AI will automate 37% of all real estate tasks, which is, if you put it down in terms of cost, is going to unlock about $34 billion in industry efficiency gains, right? And so that's an important, I think that is an eye-opening number for you to understand where the value of AI is when it comes to automating a lot of the real estate tasks, because you're going to kill busy work, and it doesn't kill the broker, right? It doesn't kill the agent, right? But it just augments, what you do. It doubles your capacity to a degree. But this is something that I think is very important. And this is skills that you learn in a brokerage. This is skills that you learn when the broker is a coach, when the broker is focused on the growth of your business. And that is that negotiation skills, advisory skills, capital stack, for example, understanding all of that is still human. And that's never going to stop being human, right? And we got to look at AI as a way to augment the consumer experience, but not to replace the human element, which is still going to be extremely important. In other words, there are micro and macro decisions that a human being has to make in order to really utilize AI properly.
Mm-hmm. I agree. And to your point, it does free up our time to focus on the higher value activities, which is the coaching and the mentorship and helping the agents build a business versus strictly being transactional, right? And in terms of the consumer, it helps enhance their experience and their interactivity with your branch and the brand, right? Especially in South Florida, where we have so many people that come from overseas, right? I had a company last year that was coming from Spain, right? And they wanted to open a facility here. And so before they came and toured, I was able to send them links and virtual tours and me walking through and talking to them, right? And that's the tech side, and Matterport has always been, something that people use to get a better idea. And now AI is making Matterport almost obsolete, right? Because it can do a much better job. And you've got all those fancy sci-fi goggles that I don't use, but and all of that is just to be able to, one, it's going to make everybody more efficient, right? Because now when those people come from Spain, they've already seen seen if it'll work for them. If not, they've seen the floor plans, they've seen all that, and now we can narrow down the warehouse space that fits them better.
Let me ask you a question to see if you agree with this statement, because we are going through a consumer revolution. We've been going through it for years in how, the consumer is taking all this technology that they have access to and all of this data. But would you agree with this statement? And the statement is the client is more informed than ever and more impatient.
Oh, 100%. They've been impatient since we introduced texting, right? Like they text you and they expect an answer like now. They expect to see 3 dots the minute they see the check mark that you've read it. They expect to see the 3 dots. So, and that's just getting more so. And I think in the conversation that I was having with these friends about how fast everything's going, we always go back to, like, when you want to know your market, nothing beats boots on the ground. And I still feel, and we mentioned this with our agents too, that nothing beats still the boots on the ground, the in-person, the one-on-one. That is still, I feel like a lot of agents and brokerages are shifting so much to the virtual and the tech because it can be so efficient that they're losing that human connection.
Yeah.
And I think if we lose that, we've lost a lot more than just the real estate business and the brokerage. So I still feel like we always need to focus on, yes, all of this stuff helps. The CREI summit that deals with social media, right? Use social media so that now you're not cold calling, you're warm calling, because people can Google you, people can see your stuff. So it's marketing to enhance. It's not meant to replace the one-on-one and the physical and the warm and the actual phone call and the actual meeting over coffee, right? All the data in the world that you can collect. And yes, I can tour a neighborhood using Google Earth, right? I can do all sorts of stuff where I don't physically have to go there. Yeah. But at least personally to me, I still can't smell a neighborhood. I still can't feel a neighborhood. I still can't hear a neighborhood when I'm doing it all virtually. And those additional senses help form a much more complete picture of what is actually going on. And it can't be enhanced by tech, right? It can't be like a sunset put in or a fence taken out, or right, you're actually going to go and you're going to see what's physically there versus what might have been manipulated.
And I'm so glad that you brought those points up, because I think a big part of it is the consumer has so many tools at their disposal that what they're expecting from you is to have that boots on the ground local experience. So, clients now behave like institutions. They want speed, they want certainty, they want advisory, to say, well, let me send you some comps. It's also to say, well, I really don't know, and to convey to the consumer something that they can do themselves to a degree, right? But if you have that inside knowledge of a marketplace, if you are, as we always repeat, the hyperlocal expert in your market, there's nothing that will replace that, And I also find that it's important because it's an interesting dynamic that when you are building that relationship with your customer and you're in the process of them buying a property, there are going to be a few instances in which that relationship and the strength of that relationship is kind of either tested or grows stronger, right? And so when you have those opportunities to actually deliver value, it's a little bit like this, like I had a friend who was a very good soccer player as a kid. And, growing up, he always told me that, that he made a ton of mistakes on the pitch, but that when it came to actually, shooting the ball to the goal, he always had this voice of his coach in his mind, which is that you might only get 2 or 3 chances in a 90-minute game to the goal, to actually get a goal. And, you may not always make it, but when you have those opportunities, you have to take advantage of them, because there might be only 2 or 3 in 90 minutes of you running around, And I think that is the same when it comes to, going through the process with your consumer. You're going to have 2 or 3 opportunities to truly deliver value. And your ability to do that at that right moment, it's going to determine that growth of that relationship. And it's going to determine really not only the relationship for that transaction, but for future transactions, and you really being that trusted advisor, for life. So I think that it's going to be important for you to have speed, clarity, and transparency. And so that means you have to be prepared. You have to be prepared going into the conversations with your clients. Those things become extremely, extremely important. Another thing that I think it's important, and I think most brokerages do that, but I think it's evolving and it has to continue to get better, is that I think that, when you get drafted by a team in the NFL, the first day that you show up, and, you get announced and you have your press conference and you say, I'm very happy that I got drafted here, all that stuff. The first thing they give you is they give you a playbook, because now you have to learn the playbook, and I think that is the expectation in the brokerage of the future, is that the agents are going to get a playbook. All right. How do I play within this ecosystem? How do I build my business? And a playbook that has processes in place, that has systems in place to implement, where it's not just about success is never about doing more, but it's about doing less with a process. It's being more intentional, being more efficient. How to turn one listing into 8, how to really understand a submarket and dominate a submarket, if you will. So I think that kind of tactical system, it's only going to get better, and I think AI is going to improve upon it as well. And I think that is always going to be a differentiating factor in the brokerage of the future. And I think that is something that most agents are looking for. They're looking for it now. They're going to be looking for it more in the future as well.
So how do you think, I'm interested with all the changes that are going on in terms of how people search, and and their companies and platforms and associations and MLSs are all trying to figure out, the best way to market properties, to showcase properties, to attract agents and agents' dollars for marketing or searching. How do you think that's going to change how a brokerage works? On the residential side, we saw Compass buyout. Now they're like 13% of the real estate, residential real estate market. We've seen a lot of, right, in some markets, we've seen a lot of commercial mergers and acquisitions. Some of the smaller brokerages are being absorbed by, because they don't have the tech, because they haven't adapted, or also just because of the normal attrition level that we're at because of the aging of the real estate brokerage industry, right? A lot of us brokers, and I put myself in there, we're older, we're baby boomer age, right? So how do you see that side of the industry changing with everything that's going on, from listing platforms and how we search to the brokerages, the smaller boutique brokerages themselves? Yeah,
I think that most brokerages are all going to have a version of the same thing, whether it's a tool, a training approach, all those other things. Just like we tell our clients, our agents, how important it is to develop relationships, that this is always going to be a relationship business, because people want to do business with those that know and trust. Jerry, who's one of our agents, mentioned, in our call this morning, KLT. They want to do business with people that they know, people that what was the L for? People that they like, and people that they trust. And so if you're going to do business, right, you got to have all three. And you can only build that. Likability is something that sometimes is instant, sometimes you develop it. The knowing factor has to do that. You have to reach out and actually get to know people. But the trust factor is something that you not only have to earn, but you have to continually earn. Trust, it's one of those things that you should never assume that you always have it. You have to continually earn it, right? And so for me, I think the differentiating factor for brokerages is going to be in the culture that you build. In other words, I think that, just like we're telling our agents, go back to basics, relationship, it's the same thing. for a brokerage, it's about that relationship. And I think what creates permanence and what creates people to want to continue to be a part of your team, to want to continue to grow, to want to continue to be a part of the brokerage is the culture that you build. And I'm not just talking about culture like, oh, we're throwing a party and we're doing birthday cakes. No, I'm talking about real culture where they know that they can trust you. They know that they can go to you when they need something. They know that when the proverbial merd hits the fan, that you're going to be there to clean up and you're going to be there to stop the fan from flowing everywhere. So, I think that is something that, again, just like the trust that you have with your clients, you have to continually earn. That culture is something that you continually have to work on and you continually have to earn. So there could be a million other changes, but remember, human beings are communal in nature, right? And we need that, especially in a business where there are a lot of no's. Look, in baseball, you fail 7 out of 10 times, and you're one of the best baseball players, right, hitters in the game. But you still have to deal with that failure. And success and failure in that field is based on how you deal with the failure, not with the success. And markets fluctuate. We go through ups and downs. When you're part of the right culture that lifts you up when you need it, that pushes you when you don't want to necessarily be pushed, but when you need to be pushed, that, it's not only empowering you, but it's also lifting you up to a certain expectation and a certain standard. I don't think those things are going to go away. I think that you achieve individual success by being a part of that team ecosystem. Just like a baseball player, at the end of the day, when they're in the plate, they're there by themselves, but it is the coaching behind the scenes. It is all of the training behind the scenes. And it's being part of a team. It's not wanting to let your teammate down. It's wanting to grow. It's wanting to be celebrated. Like, all those things are never going to go away. That's my thought on all the changes that we're seeing. I think the dust will settle. And at the end of the day, I think culture will prevail. Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts on that?
I think the biggest thing for us moving forward, especially with how rapidly everything's changing, not just tech, but everything, right? Yeah. Is the trust factor, because I feel like, and again, that's where the personal relationship comes in, and the face-to-face and the one-on-ones, is because how do you trust, sometimes you watch Instagram, and I know this is one of those things where, and you think everybody's life is perfect. Every deal is perfect. I remember before I started investing in real estate and meeting the mentorship groups that I have, I remembered thinking, God, that guy got so lucky. How did they buy such a great deal? Oh my gosh. And then I realized that what looked to me like a dream real estate deal was a nightmare. Like, they did all their due diligence, they did everything right, but then when they got in, they found major issues that there was no way to know about, or the market collapsed a year afterwards when that was when they were supposed to be hitting their stride, right? And so, but if you look at social media and you look at everything looks great, right? And that's why I love there's certain people you have to make sure you follow the real people, which are the ones who paint the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? And tell you about the deals and everything, so that you can trust that, okay, most deals are going to have an issue. Something's always going to come up. There's no such thing as a perfect anything, right? And I think social media makes everything look perfect. So I think building that trust with the public too, right? They want to see you real. They want to see that you made a mistake, that you mailed the check to the wrong person, and all that kind of stuff. And I think the trust part is going to be harder to prove online. Face to face, you get a feeling. So I know there's a lot of software out there that's going to start trying to authenticate, and I have a feeling laws are going to pass that are going to require things to be stated that it's.
Well, but there's also just like you as an agent do with a consumer. I mean, there is the lead generation part of it, or the attraction of the agent, let's say, to the brokerage. But then there is also the keeping the agent in the brokerage, keeping them happy, keeping them productive, all those things. And so there is attraction and there's retention. And I think that those, that trust that you build through retention, you have more control of than the, perceived trust that you have to build to bring him to the table, right? And I will say that, aside from the culture, it's also, and it was one of the last points that I wanted to make, is that the brokerage cannot just be a brokerage. It has to build its own ecosystem. And I think that that's going to be an important component of success. Mm-hmm. That, it's almost like the brokerage has to become like its own galaxy, mm-hmm. Where the agents are orbiting to its gravitational pull. And part of it is, it's not only the brokerage side, it's the capital side, it's the lending side, it's the title side, it's the, the vendors that you have a relationship with, it's the relationships that you have in the industry overall. Like all of those things are important factors, so that instead of silos, you have, an actual ecosystem that communicates with each other, that intersects, and that allows, to your point, trust is really built when things go bad. Right. Mm-hmm. And it is in that moment, having the resource to be able to go within your ecosystem or outside of your ecosystem to be able to say, we have a solution for that. It's very powerful and very impactful, mm-hmm. To maintaining that long term. I'm really curious. Would love to hear from our listeners, what are your thoughts about, what's going to be important to focus on in the brokerage of the future? I mean, it's easy to focus on the technology side, but it's important not to miss out on the human side of things and how important that is, because ultimately we're talking about human beings. We're not talking about ones or zeros, so those things, become important. And by the way, I was just at a conference. I went into a session where they were just talking about quantum computing. What a revolutionary thing, that is. And it's a funny joke because they were saying that quantum computing, the running gag is that it's always 10 years away. It's always 10 years away. But it seems to have been gaining speed lately, and it's going to be really interesting, the things that we're going to see in a very short period of time. I mean, you don't have to wait a long time to see incredible leaps and bounds in innovation. And, that's another thing that's going to be very important. No matter what the brokerage of the future looks like, to your point, there are going to be so many monumental changes in innovation and technology that you're always going to have to be on the lookout for, the unintended consequences of that and really where the actual value of it is.
When I think in that with the speed and pace that all of this is happening and just how many different things are happening rapidly at once, it's also going to be a big challenge. I think the broker is going to have to help provide the focus for the agents. Like, what do you focus on? What's noise? What do you not need to know about yet? Like, I don't need to know the details of quantum computing yet. Right. What I think it's going to be helping them sort through the noise and focus, focus on what needs to be done to get the deals, because that's already an issue in our industry. So many people have a hard time focusing on what they need to do and constantly learning. You're going to have to constantly be learning, which we already do, and brokerages do that. I think the learning is just going to take it's going to be provided differently. That's where the computers and AI help with efficiencies, and it's also going to have to be more ongoing. It's not just continuing education for your license or to go from, a broker to a CCIM or an SIOR. It's going to be that and more, right?
And more. And we have more for you. More episodes coming up of Between Two Chairs. We really appreciate you guys joining in and listening in, and your comments and your feedback is invaluable to us. So thank you guys very much for listening in to another episode of Between Two Chairs. Would love your comments on the brokerage of the future. With me, as always, is Jennifer Woolman. Jennifer, say bye.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.